Well, hello out there, and it's good to see everyone back for another live show of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. As you know, I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and we are glad to have you with us again tonight. We thank you for the audience participation and joining us, whether you're watching live or you catch the recorded shows that are put up on a number of the social broadcast media. We want to thank all of you for participating. It's your audience participation and watching that has made us one of the top 25 top podcasts to watch here in Northern Virginia. So we want to thank you for participating and watching our show. We also want to thank our sponsors, of course, Nationwide IT Services. NIS is a service-disabled veteran-owned small business owned by retired Army Warrant Officer C.K. Park and his crew. CK has offices all over the United States as they service and provide services to a number of clients, both private and federal sector. Got myself tongue-tied for a second there, but he provides services to all types of clients, whether you need help with IT, training support, performance management, professional development. He has a crew that can help you with whatever your business needs are. So give CK and his folks a call, and they'll be glad to help you. We also want to thank Hill and Ponton, PA. Hill and Ponton is a veteran service disability attorney located in Florida. They've been in business for over 30 years, folks, and you need to give them a call. If you're one of those veterans that is trying to navigate the VA system and the disability system and you're struggling and having trouble, Hill and Ponton has a proven track record of helping those veterans and their families get what they deserve to get through their injuries, the military-related injuries. So give them a call. You can also visit their website, hillandponton.com. They have training videos up there and information videos as well that you can watch before calling them. So I encourage you to do so, and they'll be more than glad to help you. All right, so let's move into this evening's show. And I want to welcome our guest this evening, William Foley of Foley Family Law. William is located down in the Tempe area in Florida near MacDill Air Base, and he's been married for 17 years, has 2 kids, and took an interest in the legal aspect of divorce and family law some time ago, especially military related, because he grew up in a home with a military veteran and heard a lot of the stories and things that were happening as he grew up to friends and acquaintances of his father, and realized that there were people out there in the military that had to deal with special circumstances. So, William, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. And you said you are located there in Tampa, not too far from MacDill Air Base, correct?
Correct. And first of all, Paul, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I'm here in Tampa, Florida, very close to MacDill Air Force Base. Yes.
Yeah, so I know even though you're in Tampa, you do service clients from all over when the situation is right. But I think it's interesting because myself being a career, military person, being retired from the military, I kind of went through this myself years ago, and I thought it was interesting that you specialize in working with military personnel in terms of divorce, separations, dealing with child custody and all that stuff. And of course, the military community can have a unique take on that because of some of the military laws and things that you have to deal with. But before we talk a little bit about that, how did you get into this? I mentioned that you grew up in a home with a military father, but what prompted you to really get into this?
So, yes, like you said, my dad was a veteran. And so obviously growing up and hearing a lot of his stories and discussing with him, his experience. But living in Tampa, Florida, I love Tampa. I went to law school up in New York, lived in New York for a few years, but when I was done with law school, I wanted to get back to Tampa as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I love Tampa, and Tampa has an extraordinarily high military population with veterans and active and all different reservists. Just the full spectrum of it.
Yeah.
So early on in my career, and I've been practicing for about 18 years now. From the start, I would begin to get military related cases with military issues, and they're very specialized in the way that the issues in a military case are a lot of times completely different than a regular divorce. So over the years, I have done so many different cases, military related issues, that it's just a pretty decent size of my practice is, helping military service members and veterans. And it's been great because there's not a lot of people that know the law in Florida, military specific wise, like the pension, then that'll something I'm sure we'll talk about at some point. Military retirement is its own, it's its own animal, and you have to understand it in order to be able to represent your client appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. There's so many nuances, especially even when you talk about child custody with military families being separated and deployments and, all kinds of other things that you have to deal with and keep in mind. So, kind of take us through when you're approached with someone from the military and they are looking at a situation that they think, is untenable, and, they say, hey, I'm at that point now where I think I need to move forward. How do you start that off, and what are some of the ways that you advise them to start taking them through this?
Right. So again, we're looking, first off is, number one, where are they at and where do they want to be? Sometimes we have military members at all different phases of their career and life, from the very beginning to, like I said, they've retired and now they're, either working as a contractor or they're reserves, or there's all different mixes of it. So we try to figure out where they're at, number one, in their life, and where do they want to go? Do they want to stay in Florida, or do they want to go to Virginia, or do they want to go somewhere else? So that's the first thing we want to isolate is, do you want to stay here? Because that's a big first decision, because if you have Florida govern what's going to happen, that's going to follow you for a very, very long time. So that's the first thing we want to look at.
So are you, just out of curiosity, then, if you get someone who comes to you and says, no, he says, I'd rather go to Virginia after this is over, are you still able to help them navigate through from where you're at? Or
yeah, we've had a lot of military service members that will come to us. We'll start the case in Florida, maybe somewhere along the way they're assigned somewhere else, or PCS to a different location, whatever it is. They choose some assignment somewhere, they retire, and they want to, they get this. Then we try to figure out, okay, and we've had that happen in the middle of cases where it starts one way, and then now we got to pivot and try to figure out, okay, let's figure this out. The good thing is, at least in my experience of doing this, the judges in Hillsborough County and a lot of the counties around Florida that I've seen are very understanding of a military service member's service to their country, and they're not going to hold it against them. So that's a big aspect of it. And a lot of times I'm questioned a lot of times of, well, I have to do trainings. I have to go over here. I might be deployed. I might have to move over here. All these different things, a judge is very reluctant to hold that against a military service member. So that helps us out, but we may have to figure it out as we get into the thick of the case of, okay, maybe we now need to pivot to a different state.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that you say that the judges seem to support, or at least try to support, the military members. I was back younger in my career in the Army when I went through this, and this was back in the 80s, and back during that time, we were not looked on quite as favorably in a lot of areas.
Yeah.
And so, I had an attorney who helped me, but I still remember the judge sometimes was not very how can I say, very understanding. You just got the idea that being a member of the military around that area was not a very popular thing in his courtroom. So it's good to hear that, and you see the same thing in the general public, how the general public respects the military now and veterans and things. So I think a lot's changed in that respect, and hopefully it makes your job a little bit easier.
It does. I mean, there's respect, especially in a town like Tampa, with such a dramatically large, population. I mean, it's not something they can overlook. I mean, they're not going to an entire segment of the population just say, okay, we're going to, just because you decided to serve your country, we're going to, make this punitive and, penalize you for this. I don't see that. So that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah. My wife and I spent a while in Tampa when we had our RV. We'd pull down there to the RV park on McGill and spend some summers down there, running around the area. And one thing I thought that was really good there on the base was they actually had a retiree assistance office too. That was set up specifically for military retirees in that area to come in for anything, including widows who needed help when their spouses died, or, widowers, whatever the case may be. So I thought that was really great from what I saw down there, in the time that we spent there.
Yeah. No, it's great. They have so many great programs, and they're extremely beneficial in the military community and veterans community. And I think they're always trying to, make advancements as well.
Well, so you told us kind of how you start off, but would you share with the audience what you see in the difference between a civilian couple coming through the divorce process as opposed to a military couple? What are some of those big differences that really stand out?
So number one is the retirement. The retirement vehicles that are in a military divorce are different than anything else. I mean, obviously other federal forms of retirement, but it's so much different than, and we see it in other civil servant situations where I deal with a lot of police officers as well, and firefighters and all that. So all of them are different, but the military pension is so much different. The TSP plan, also the thrift savings plan, also a completely different animal. So all those areas, and to divide a pension in Florida, at least, because I can say it as a Florida, licensed attorney, you need what's called a military pension division order, which is different than any other type of retirement plan. Any other 401k that you would see anywhere, you need what's called a quadro, a qualified domestic relations order. This, you need a very specific order that a lot of times people don't know anything about. Attorneys that have practiced for years and they still have no idea what a military pension division order is, or how it's supposed to work, or how it's different from a regular division order. So, that's one of the biggest ones, because that is something that is important. People have put their life on the line, in their service, and they would like to not just say, I'm going to make a mistake and accidentally give away, a substantial percentage of it, that there's no need to do so. Like the survivor benefits plan, things like that, those are areas of it that are very specific to military divorces that you're not going to see anywhere else. And if the attorney doesn't understand that, that's a big problem. Big problem.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely understand that. Correct me if I'm wrong. In most cases, and I'm assuming it's like this down there too, where you have a spouse or a couple who's been married for at least 10 years of that military career. That's still the cutoff where the spouse is entitled to a portion of that retirement?
So federally, yes. Florida law, they could be married for a day and there's still an entitlement. So Florida law, basically, for the time that, and that's the tricky part. Also, people come in, they say, well, it's only been 9.5 years. It's we haven't hit that level yet. I'm like, this is Now we're dealing with Florida law with the layer of the federal law as well. And Florida
Yeah.
law says from the time that you were married, the day you were married until the day you filed for divorce, everything within there is marital. So that maybe not a marital pension federally might be considered now marital because of the fact that it's a divorce in Florida. Tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask that question,
Mhm.
because I know in some states it's fairly cut and dry.
Mhm.
Some states they go by the same basic requirement that the federal government sets in place.
Mhm.
But I was not aware of how they did it down in
Mhm.
Florida. So I wanted to make sure I asked that question. So when they come to you, um, and they begin talking to you about the possibility of divorce, what are the first things that you share with them in terms of what they need to do?
So number one, like I said, it's figuring out, are they going to be here for a while? And so that's the first step. If this is going to be their home base and they're going to stay here in Florida, then we say, okay, let's proceed forward. And the goal in any case is to see if we can settle it. That's across the board. There's,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, judges decide 15 to 20% of divorce cases where there's attorneys involved. Most people, end up settling at some point along the way and don't have a judge do it. So we work in the beginning to try to see if we can get to some type of a resolution, and like I said, most cases are able to be resolved. The ones that cannot be resolved go to trial. So that's kind of the next step of, okay, after we know that we're going to be here, let's try to see, where there can be some similarities, where we can work some different things out. What are going to be the issues inside the divorce? Is it going to be the retirement? Is it going to be alimony? Is it going to be child custody? Could there be deployment issues, child support issues? All those different types of things come up, and we just need to start kind of going through each of those issues.
yeah. I think that I can see where that could definitely become confusing for a lot of people in terms of, looking at it from. It always seems like when you have the government or the military involved in something, there always seems to be those extra confusing steps.
Right.
And
Right.
it's good that you guys are there to be able to help them. So once they make those decisions, whether they want to stay or go, if they sit down and they say, well, no, I'm not quite sure we're going to be able to decide, or they do, where do you take them then?
So the next step is to file, file the divorce case, and then to serve the other side. So we serve them with the paperwork, and then the case begins. The courts require the parties to exchange discovery documents and
Yeah.
paperwork to make sure that there's adequate disclosure and they understand what's going on. And then somewhere early on, normally within the first few months or so, maybe 3-4 months, usually the goal is to get to a mediation. And a mediation is an opportunity where they can try to have a resolution between the two of them. Because again, there's case law out there that judges have said and the courts have said, people are allowed to make their own laws if they want to, in the way of that settlement, the contract they come to. If they feel that that's best for them, then that's great. The judges would much rather stay out of it. They all day long, they're saying, hey, we're strangers. Do you really want us to make your decision for you, or would you rather make it for yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just look at this and I think I kind of remember a little bit of what I went through,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of wish that there would have been somebody like you around back then, because I was much younger then, and it was all very confusing for me as well. Well, we're gonna take a short break, William, and when we come back, I want to continue on because I want to get your take on how this bleeds over into the family and how it affects the kids and what you've seen
Okay.
and what you can do for to help them.
Absolutely.
So for those of you in the audience, if you'll hold on, we'll be right back after a quick message from our sponsors.
In service of our nation, you gave everything you had. You sacrificed your comfort, your peace, and sometimes even your well-being. Over 3 decades, Hill & Ponton has helped to be a guiding light for veterans seeking their rightful disability benefits. When our heroes are in need, we are not just lawyers, we're an ally, a team who understands the struggles you faced. If you're a veteran seeking the benefits you deserve, let us stand with you on this journey, because every battle deserves a hero, and no hero should fight alone.
Living in a world filled with lunacy, it seems that stress and turmoil follow us everywhere we go. Perhaps it's gotten to the point where you wish you could turn off the distractions of daily living and have a good laugh. Well, we have a recommendation for you. Pick up a copy of The Dunce Cap, a humorous and satirical look at American society and the follies of our culture. Join the author Paul Holbert as he takes you on a trip through the nonsensical and often ridiculous practices of our everyday lives, from political correctness and our legal system to the folly of the media and our obsession with reality television. See how these and other outrageous practices of everyday people make us a perfect cast for the next slapstick sitcom. So go ahead, you know you need it. Take a frank look at the more nonsensical side of American society and see why we are prime candidates for the stool in the corner and the dunce cap that sits on top.
All right, welcome back, everyone. And of course, you've been watching the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner with our guest tonight, William Foley from Foley Family Law down in Tampa. And of course, William's been sharing with us their legal assistance specialty area for military and their families and veterans. And one thing, William, before we continue on, I wanted to ask you, in some states, before a couple can file for divorce, normally there's a certain amount of time that they have to separate or live apart. Is that the case down there in Florida as well?
So Florida's, it's not quite like Vegas, but it's as close as you can get to Vegas. Vegas, you can get married at any time, and divorce is just super easy. Florida, you really only need 2 things in Florida. For residents, you need to have lived here for 6 months.
Okay.
And then somebody needs to say that the marriage is irretrievably broken.
Yeah.
So, it's just the residency required of that 6 month. And that can be proven by a driver's license or a lease or, utility bills or something like that to show you've actually been there for that 6 month period. So, that's it from the standpoint of the divorce. Now, like you're right. There's so many states that have those waiting periods, and some states there's just extremely long waiting period, very complicated. We don't have any of that. So it's good.
Yes. So, what I thought was interesting was, and having thought about it, you're dealing with military clients here, and family members.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the military clients, I'm sure, that you've dealt with, you've had to navigate other really delicate areas, such as clients with PTSD,
right,
and maybe struggling with those types of things, maybe struggling with physical injuries
mm-hmm.
from their time in the military. How has that affected what you guys have done and how you've operated?
So I'd say there's a large contingent of my clients and former clients that have had some form of disability pay, and that's a complicated area. Just as you're saying, like, what are the difference in it? And it's just, that's also sometimes people are like, well, is it tax? Is it non-taxable? How does it fit into the alimony calculations? How does it fit into child support? And all of that is something that we have to look at, and we have to try to determine how it interplays into that specific military member's divorce or their veterans divorce. So, for the reality is that those types of situations, we come into a contact with them all the time. I have had a number of clients that, have suffered from, the spectrum of different disability related issues within, with veterans. And as you said, PTSD. And again, that's another one where, sometimes people will think, well, and, I'll get questions like that. Well, is the judge going to look at me differently?
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, like, I don't know if I can just argue it differently, but if I, explain to the court, how this kind of came about, like, I've never seen a judge, at least in my career in this area, ding somebody because of their military service. Even in that, I have gotten tons of dads, primary custody, majority of the time, all that with PTSD, with all that, like, so it's just, for me, it's like, I know that there's sometimes people are very concerned about it. And I hear those concerns. I understand those concerns. And that's why we talk about it really right off the bat of like, well, we need to be ahead of it, because they're concerned, like, well, I think they're going to say that, I received disability pay for this, and they're going to say it's because of my PTSD. And I'm concerned how that's going to interplay into the custody situation. And like I said, I have found that, judges are very, very understanding of the situation. And I think, again, that's been helpful. There are probably many, many other areas where that's not the case. I'm luckily in an area that people understand that.
Yeah. The reason why I kind of touched on that was not only is it an important, consideration for what you're doing, but, I just remember myself having lived through that for a number of years. And, with the help of the Army and some clinical psychologists that I was referred to, they helped me work through a lot of the major portions of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember what it was like when I was going through it and it was hitting me hot and heavy.
Right.
I mean, there were times I was a basket case.
Right.
And, so I was just wondering how that would affect, what you guys are doing and how you're having to deal with the veterans and those families. So it's good to know that, there's a positive side to it.
There is. My experience may be different than people in other states, but
yeah,
I've just been very pleasantly surprised, I guess, because, and I say that in the way just because my clients have been so concerned. Like, that's one of their major fears a lot of times, is that they're going to be looked at differently because of that, especially with regards to their kids. And I just, like I said, I have a whole host of dads that have, walked away with majority of the time, or 50-50 or whatever, that there was no, indication there that, that had any bearing on it, in them as a father. So that's a very, very, good thing, I believe.
Yeah, because I know the stigma from that can be kind of
right
rough to a lot of veterans in so many ways. So I want to ask you, and I'm sure you've seen this, and this is something that a lot of people think about, is the effect that you see on these military children.
Right.
Because, I mean, in my younger years, I was a military brat. And I moved around and I got used to hopping from place to place. And of course, once I joined the military myself, I was all over the world for 21 years. So I thought I became fairly resilient as a military kid and then later as a military veteran. But what do you see when you're dealing with these children that not only are dealing with a parent possibly deploying and being gone, but now here you're faced with a situation of possibly their family breaking up, going through divorce? What are you guys seeing there, and how do you help them?
Right. So, again, it's going to be like similar to other divorces in that it depends on both of the people, and I can say that over the last 2 decades, I've talked to probably 5,000 people about their divorces and family law issues. And there's no 2 cases that are have ever been the same. There's like I said, lots of pattern, lots of things that help me to be able to help people guide them through the process, but they're all different. So it just depends on the other spouse. If the other spouse wants to pour gasoline all over it, and burn everything to the ground, they're going to do it, and it's going to create mass hysteria and problems. Going to create problems for the kids. But if both parents are, reasonable enough to say, all right, let's figure a way to get this thing ironed out. Let's move on. Let's be reasonable. Like, no, the possible deployments in the future, stuff like that, it shouldn't affect custody. It shouldn't affect the time sharing. It shouldn't affect parental rights. There's a reason why there's constitutional rights for it. Like there's all this there that, again, if they can be reasonable about it, they won't make those different types of arguments. Now, there's also the Service Member Civil Relief Act, which has all these other provisions that are also very beneficial that, again, a lot of attorneys don't know even about anything about the statute. They don't know about the different rights that are afforded military members that are deployed. If there's a deployment that they can designate another family member for their time sharing while they're deployed. So they can make sure that they have that time with their kids, even while they're deployed, because they know that, like, maybe their mother or their sister or something like that is going to ensure that they have that connection even while they're deployed. So there's all these other things that are out there that sometimes it's just being a little bit creative about it. And then sometimes we got to force the issue in certain situations if the other side is very unreasonable. But if both parties can be reasonable, then they can get to a resolution and they can help the kids out, because the kids are going to suffer if there's just, fighting and back and forth. And that's across the board in any divorce. But in these situations, it makes it even more complicated because, like I said, for a lot of these different issues, it does complicate things.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I had an experience firsthand. I was a platoon sergeant during Desert Storm and was deployed with 2nd Armored Cav. And I had a platoon, and one evening we were stopped in an area, and I came back from a quick meeting around our talk, and I saw one of my soldiers. We were lucky enough to be in an area where we were able to set up a tent for a couple of days and, sleep on a cot instead of on the armored vehicles.
Right.
And I came in, and there was one of my soldiers sitting on his cot, and everybody else that was in the tent was asleep. And this was late at night.
Yeah.
So I knew, you knew something was wrong. And I walked over to him, I sat down and started talking with him, and finally came out. He was able to go to the MI unit that was attached to us that wasn't far from our location. And they had sat phones where occasionally we could get in there and try to make a call back to Germany to the family. I was fortunate enough to get one of those in during my 7 months over there. And it just so happened that when he called his home, another man answered his telephone.
Oh, gosh.
And then all of a sudden he hung up, and he asked the operator to try the number again. And when he called back, again, there was that same man answer, and he said, "No, you have the wrong number." Finally, the third time was the charm, and nobody answered.
Yeah.
And of course, you can imagine what it did to that soldier sitting over there halfway around the world facing combat.
Yeah.
And, the advice I could give him was based on being an old crusty platoon sergeant in the Army. And I said, look, you can't do anything about it right now.
Right.
But what you want to do is make sure that you survive through this. You do what you have to do, and you survive through this so that you can go home and you can deal with it when you get back home.
Right. Right.
And so, but I saw how that young soldier was just tore apart. And being in that situation, and I'm sure that you have run into situations where it's been highly emotional because of the situation. And having seen that myself, I still think about that when I think about a military divorce.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that is, sometimes people see that in movies, but it's just, this is like daily life. This is something that happens, and it's just, it's horrible to see it because, again, it does happen, and people getting their affairs in order as much as they can before they're deployed and before they leave. That's an important, suggestion that we have, because sometimes we'll do cases where, as I said before, we do a lot of divorces, but we also do a lot of unmarried, so paternity cases as well, where they're unmarried. And that's even more complicated because if you got somebody that maybe they were only together for a couple months, and then they had a baby, and then, he's deployed somewhere in the middle of that,
Yeah.
and it's a long deployment. It's just, and they come back to a very complicated situation always, so that's another thing that we can also do things for them while they're deployed. And I've gotten a lot of things done, paternity agreements, divorce agreements, all that, done while the military service member is deployed, and not here, because, especially with the advent of, all of the technology that we have to be able to do this. Sometimes they're like running around trying to get a notary or something like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, we can still get it done. We can do it. So that way, when they get back, it's just not that it's the wild, wild west. They're walking into a situation, like you said, of they're walking in thinking it's their house and some other guy's living there.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I mean, you've been sharing a lot of good information with us about what you guys do, kind of how things flow, what to look out for. If you would share with us, when you've got a military family facing something like this, what is the thing that you advise people not to do? So,
no, in any situation, it's just, going nuclear, and, it's trying to bring things down to a level of, all right, let's find a way to get through this in a way that, again, especially if there's children involved, that it's not going to, affect them, so far. I mean, divorce is going to affect them no matter what. And we understand that, but let's not make it to where let's not run those therapy bills up through the roof, when they're 36. And, so let's try to see what we can do to work through this in a way. And, I've talked about that a lot of times before, good ways to discuss a divorce or a breakup or split up with the children. There's good ways to do it, and there's horrible ways to do it. So in this type of situation, it definitely shouldn't be done if a military service member is deployed, and I know that happens. So, it should be, when military service members sitting there looking at their kids in the face, if possible, if they can, when they're telling them, and that's, because that's tough, with some of the technology that we have now with Zoom, and with FaceTime and all these other different things, it can be a little bit, it's better than I guess it was before. But you don't want the other parent telling them, oh, this is what's happening. And then it's just, such a passage of time goes by before they actually get to kind of come home and look them in the face and explain what's going on. So that's a big part of it, is being on the same page, communicating about it. We tell people, one of my biggest suggestions, and people ask me as a divorce lawyer, what's your biggest suggestions, even for married couples? And that's just communication, communicating with each other as much as possible. And that's even in a divorce situation, try to communicate, try to keep the trust levels at a point where you can get to a resolution. You're not really going to fully trust the other side, but if you can trust them enough to just get through the bad part of it and just get it done, don't make it worse than it needs to be. That's a win in of itself, that you can put it behind you, move on from it. And then again, the kids are going to benefit from that, because they got to like restart and, hit a hard reset button and move on now. And if they can see their parents do it, then they can know, okay, I'm going to be all right.
Yeah, that's some good advice, I think, is having the parents especially look at this from a common sense standpoint, especially where the kids are involved. Right. Well, I want to ask you, though, William, before we close out the show, because you've given us a lot of good food for thought here and shared a lot of good information on what you guys do and how you can help for anyone out there who's listening. So I want to ask you, before we close our show, if there was one message you'd like to share with the audience, what would it be?
So number one is, I guess I kind of said it before about communication. I think that's huge, and I say that a lot to my clients. I say it a lot to, people that, ask for my advice on different things, and, to try to be able to communicate, whether it's with your spouse or whatever, or, if you're going to be going through this context of being able to talk to others, reaching out to family members, if you're going to retain an attorney for it, talk to them about it, tell them the truth, tell them what's going on, let them be your advocate, lean on other people, as the process of going through a divorce is normally debilitating. And I'm sure there's situations out there that it's pretty clean and it's not emotional and all that. I'm sure they exist, but I don't see a whole lot of them. I see most of them are pretty, pretty complex, and it's emotional. So I think people should, employ different people to help them, whether it be through counseling, whatever it is, support groups, talking with friends about it, opening up, reaching out, texting them, just saying, hey, how's it going? Can we meet up? Can we just, grab something to eat? I'd like to pick your brain about this. I know you went through this. I want to know. Just the communication, keeping it. If you keep it all inside, it's just not good. So it's not good.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on and join us this evening.
Absolutely.
For those of you that are out there watching the show, again, William Foley from WFoleyLaw.com down in Tampa. His organization specializes in assisting veterans and their families through divorce in situations such as that. So, visit their website, WFoleyLaw.com, see what they can do. And hopefully, William, this will be a continuation of success for you guys in helping these families through all of these problems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me. And like I said, I hope that some of the information that I provided is helpful to, to those watching or listening to it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And for those of you in our audience out there, of course, as you know, as we close each show, we want to try to provide some information to you that might be useful. And of course, you'll find this posted on the information and resource site on my page on the studio website. Grab your new updated 2025 Veterans Benefit Guide. You can go to the va.gov and you can find it. There's the long drawn out website where it's at, but they have the new 2025 Veterans Benefit Guide that kind of goes in pretty good detail to tell you what all the benefits you have as a veteran under the VA. So I encourage you, for those of you who are out there, to go take a look at it. You can download it in a PDF and keep it on your computer as a handy guide. So please take a moment to do that. And again, I want to thank our guest tonight, William Foley from Foley Family Law. We want to thank our audience out there for you joining us this evening. And of course, for all our veterans out there and your families, thank you for your service and all the things that you do for our country. We hope that you will join us next show on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner on the Going Solo streaming network. We hope to see you on our next show.